All right,
Okay.
hello, everyone, and welcome as you are signing on. I will begin my introduction. I am Kimberly Taws from the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, North Carolina. We are partnering with Oolong Books for this event, this book launch of Book Eaters. And I want to thank you all so very much for joining us live or watching this video later. Before I introduce our two authors, I just want to thank you all for supporting independent bookstores. And independent bookstores literally only exist because you choose to walk in and shop with us. And I am grateful every day that you choose to do so, and also that you choose to participate in things like this. Today is the book launch of The Book Eaters. And before I introduce Sun Yi, I'm going to introduce Paul, who will be interviewing her about the book today. Paul Tremblay has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards and is the author of Survivor Song, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, the crime novels The Little Sleep, and No Sleep Till Wonderland, and the short story collection Growing Things and Other Stories. His essays and short fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Entertainment Weekly Online, and numerous year's best anthologies. He has a master's degree in mathematics, interesting, and lives outside of Boston with his family. So the lady of the day is my next delight to introduce. Sun Yi is an autistic fantasy writer and busy mother of two. Born in the States and later raised in Hong Kong, she now lives in inner city North England. When not reading, running, and falling over in yoga or rolling D20s, she will escape to the city to wild swim in lonely dales. Her debut novel for adults, The Book Eaters, is scheduled for release today through tour out of Macmillan, USA, and will be coming out on the 18th of August in the UK. At the end of the conversation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions, but as we move through, there's a little Q&A button. Please feel free to put your questions in there as opposed to the chat. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy today's event.
Thank you, Kimberly. As a quick reminder, as Kimberly said, later on, maybe about 30, 40 minutes in, I'll start taking questions for Sun Yi in the Q&A button, not the chat one. I don't know where it is. It's down there on my screen. Okay. So I'm super excited and honored to be here to help Sun Yi celebrate the release of The Book Eaters, which is a really wonderful novel that totally undercut, and I mean this in the best way, and confounded any expectations I had for this book. I mean, I found it just to be continually, surprising in all the best ways. So I wouldn't dream of spoiling anything. So we'll let Sun Yi talk about the book without, and you can decide how much you want to give away. So why don't we just open? I mean, the title itself references, sort of we'll call them like a set of beings, the book eaters themselves. So why don't we start with, what was the kernel of the story? Like, what was the spark that started this novel?
I think we already talk about books like food. We talk about them being sweet or spicy or kind of bitter or bittersweet. We talk about consuming media. I think it's a very small leap for most people who read and love books to think about them as a meal. And then just, I guess, lots of aesthetic influences. There was a really obscure 90s cartoon I watched growing up, had a scene with a sorcerer eating a book and learning all its knowledge. There's a kind of Japanese yokai creature which eats books and feeds off what's in them, and just lots of things like that. I think I just always had this. I started writing a short story, I think, about a book eater, and it was just not fitting into that format very well. It felt like something bigger, so I kind of developed it up over time, and it really changed over the years and months.
No, I think I know I've always had the dream of, I wish I could learn something. Usually it's like a science fiction dream, like I just learn it by plugging into my head, but the idea of eating a book and being able to sort of consume everything that's in it instantly. For readers, that's sort of part of the dream, right? Although at the same time, I mean, I think as readers, the dream is being able to live and breathe inside the book too. Anyway, so you said it started as a short story. Like, do you remember like when, year roughly when you started?
2017, probably.
2017.
Yeah, and it was very different. It was about like this poet that meets a mysterious woman in a chat room. I mean, it was rubbish, really, but and obviously they meet up and she's a book eater, and it was very, very different. And it just kind of evolved, and I changed location and time zone a few times. At some point, I put it together with the mother-child dynamic, and that's when it came together for me. It started to.
Okay, so if I change glasses, it's because I made poor life decisions. I didn't get bifocals, so I have separate reading glasses. I'm sort of ruining the day. So apologies to everybody out there. That was better though in the start of the pandemic. Not that anyone needs to know this. I had my regular glasses and I was putting readers over them. It was a really good look. Anyway, let's talk about Devon and her son. I mean, because the opening chapter is sort of a jaw dropper. What a wonderful, and as a horror writer, even this, I wouldn't call this a horror novel, although there's certainly elements I think to it. But that opening chapter is really sort of a shocking and I think a brilliant and fun way to introduce Devon and her son. So actually, let's start with Devon. You mentioned that relationship between mother and child came in. Do you want to talk a little bit about Devon? Maybe describe to people watching, I guess, with the level of comfort you have for spoilers, like who Devon is, and maybe hint at a little bit of her character.
I think things that are introduced in the first chapter are not a big deal because that's free on the internet, basically.
Yeah.
So you first meet Devon. She's a single mother, and she's kind of trying to buy alcohol in the store, and she can't because she gets carded and she doesn't have any ID. And the point of that is she's not a part of society. There are no records about her. And you're introduced to her son, who has this issue where he consumes minds. He's a kind of somewhere between a vampire and a zombie, I suppose, if you want to blend monster classifications. And the opening chapter is basically Devon is hunting someone for her son. And she's got pretty strict criteria on the kinds of people that she looks for him. So there's a little bit of a let the right one in vibe. And yeah, I agree with you that it's not a horror novel. I know some people call it that. I think I've seen it shelved on that in Goodreads, and I kind of cringe a bit when I get horror readers saying this isn't a horror novel, because I know it's not. But
they're obnoxious.
Horror is fun. No, it's fine. And I think the extent of my horror reading is kind of some of your books, Lovecraft and like a bit of Jeff Vandermeer, and otherwise I haven't read that much into the genre.
That's quite okay. You learned this again fairly early, but continuing talking about Kai, the idea that he consumes minds. That's sort of another branch potentially of book eaters, which we'll go back to book eaters too. But one of the things I really appreciated was how the amount of detail and logical thought that went into not only the world that you created, but sort of the rules that these characters have to live by, including Kai, who's 5 years old, I believe, right?
Yes.
For the novel. And just like the book eaters, so if you read a book, you sort of consume the whole story. It sort of lives with you. If he consumes a mind, sort of that mind is sort of becomes part of him, and he struggles with random memories of other people that he ate. And I don't know, that really struck me as sort of like a really sort of, I don't know, horrific experience was. So that's just more me sort of like saying, hey, wow, that was really cool. So let me ask you this instead. Like, how did you get from book eaters to this other branch called mind eaters, or dragons that they're sometimes referred to?
So one of the struggles I had with the book is that I've not had with other books I've written or tried to write. There was just way too much plot, and there's way too much going on. The scope I envisioned for the story was a lot bigger, and initially there were kind of different kinds of eaters, like music and art ones as well, and this whole thing. But I realized early on that going into all that world building went down a different route, and it took it out of the narrow focus on the characters and into a kind of I guess more fantasy, more exploring fantasy creatures, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. That's just not the direction I was going for.
Mhm.
So I guess there is a lot of lore that didn't ever make it to the book, and some of it I walked away from because giving explanations, I know that frustrates some readers, and I think some people who want answers to everything are going to find that frustrating, but it detracted from a novel that was really struggling to balance the pacing as it was. I don't know if that comes across, but definitely when I was writing it, I felt that tightrope of like a little bit too much information and it immediately bogs down. So yeah, the thing with the mind eaters is I guess the lore that I originally envisioned is mind eaters are the kind of data collector bolts. I won't say too much on that, but that'll make sense to you as an answer and to people who read the book or will read it. They're designed to eat their own kind, really more than humans. But it just ended up not being relevant to the plot, and that was the other reason why a lot of that stuff just stayed out.
No, I think you walked that line brilliantly. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's just I assumed it would be a series because when you write fantasy, you tend to sell things as a series, and that's not how Tor envisioned it. In the end, I kind of agreed with him as well. So I left a lot of stuff out, assuming there'd be more time to explain it, and there wasn't.
Oh, well, I mean, as someone who doesn't read a lot of series, I love that aspect of the book, that I felt like you were sort of dropped into this world almost in situ, and you were learning enough to know how to exist and follow the story. But I never felt like I was overloaded with too much information that I didn't necessarily need. And in fact, I thought it was so clever, and I want to talk about the structure of the book a little bit. I thought it was really clever of you to, so at the start of every chapter, Sunny sometimes has almost like, I don't know what they're called. They're not quite epigraphs like what you have at the beginning of the book, but they're little quotes from, I think sometimes it's from real books and sometimes it's from a book that's talking about the history of the book eaters. I was like, oh, I think, I sort of love that structure. So let me ask you a different, well, you can talk about that too, but another question I had about the structure was, when did you know, or like when did you decide to sort of commit to not having the linear style? Because again, this is not a spoiler, but it bounces back and forth between present and Devon's past. And I mean, it's mainly from Devon's point of view, not 100%, but it's generally bouncing back and forth. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the whys of that structure.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think this might be an answer that only kind of interests writers. I don't know if that makes sense to readers. But I started out writing fiction. It's not very commercial at all. I don't know if that's part of being autistic or the fact I just like reading books that don't have a plot. But that's the kind of books I was writing. And when I made the decision to try and kind of chase publishing more seriously, I started reading a lot of thrillers, because they have a very different structure from fantasy a lot of times. And I don't know what the term for it is, but the term I call it when I talk to my critique partners is like kind of reader's journey, where the book is structured around the reader experience rather than what the protagonist is doing, if that makes sense. So I think an example of that is like Needless Street or Gone Girl, or actually Where the Crawdad Sings does the same thing, where the story could be told in a linear fashion, but it's not, because the order that the story is told in is designed to manipulate reader emotions, basically, and string them along and set up expectations and then undermine them. And I really enjoyed that and really kind of enjoyed the structure that they were using. I didn't see it a whole lot in fantasy. I don't know why we don't use it more. Maybe we think too much about hero's journey and what the hero is going through. I don't know. Someone more academic could say. But yeah, really early on, I think when I was reading thrillers and thinking, oh, this is what I want, that fast-paced, what was another one? The First 15 Lives of Harry August. I don't know if you've read that book.
I haven't.
It's like a literary thriller that was written by a British author here, and it's about a guy that every time he dies, he's reborn in the same life and he lives it again. And it's told out of chronological order, and it's really, really effective. And just seeing it used like that, it's really interesting, and studying it. And I think because I'm an underwriter as well, I either need multiple points of view, or I need multiple timelines, or I don't have enough content, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really cool answer. I hadn't thought about books necessarily in the terms of like the reader's experience as opposed to the protagonist. I'm gonna have to think about that. I like that. All right, let's see. Sorry, I'm reading from a distance. Seanan McGuire's book, when I first got the book, Shannon's blurb sort of jumped out at me. And mentioned that this book would be a masterpiece coming from an established author, never mind a first-time novelist. And when I read the book, I totally agree. This isn't to say that, there aren't, I haven't read like this isn't to say I haven't read like first novelists, that, obviously stand out. There are plenty that do, but I mean, this felt, it felt like a book that was totally within control of the author at all times. It didn't, so let me say it this way. I've read plenty of first novels, was like, oh, this is good, but it read like a first novel to me.
Okay.
Whatever that means without unpacking that too much.
No, yeah.
So part of me is like, how'd you do that? But I guess the larger question besides the compliment would be, so you'd written a bunch of short stories before, before you jumped into this novel. And I don't know, like you may have mentioned you started other novels. So I guess my question was, how did you, how was managing that jump from short stories to a first novel, or at least a first novel that you felt like could be published or should be published?
So I started writing novels first, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, I think 2016 or something like that. I kind of hit like 29 or 30 and had an early midlife crisis and realized that I wanted to write, and I'd never even like attempted to finish a book. And it was stressing me out. So I wrote one, and it was not fit for man or beast to read. It was really, really bad.
sure, yeah.
And I kept rewriting it, I don't know, like 9 or 10 times, and it just had too many things going on, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I tried to write like a 5-person point of view epic fantasy that was all over the map. And yeah, I wrote another one later. So I tend to rewrite books rather than write lots of books. I think authors fall in one of those two camps, and I try rewriting them. Yeah, so I was writing the second one, that's when I started doing short stories, and I found them really useful for just, you can experiment a bit more, you can do structures that don't work in a big story, you can do all these different lengths. I'm really slow with shorts. I write 1 or 2 a year because they're a lot of work, and I don't find them easy. This is the 3rd book I've written, and it's the only one that's seen any kind of success. I do think that the draft that my editor first saw was kind of a hot mess. So I think a lot of that polish comes from her really asking me hard questions. Well, you've been through the editorial process, you get back the edit letters, and it's basically all the ways your story doesn't work.
Right.
So that was a really valuable learning experience.
I mean, this is probably a hard question to answer, but was there something either through her questions or her advice that really clicked, like a global overall thing? Or was there something that clicked with this book in the act of writing, its first or whatever draft you ended up turning in compared to the previous ones?
Like compared to previous books, or?
Yeah, compared to the ones that you wrote that, you haven't been able to publish yet, or had decided not to publish, I should say.
No, I did try. No one was interested in them. So the first book, I remember I sent it off to this lady that does kind of early page critiques, and she sent it back, and she just said, there's nothing wrong with the writing, but I don't care about your characters. So it doesn't matter what the writing is like. And that was a really useful lesson. That I've realized that, good stories are kind of about characters. And at the time I was kind of doing this side gig, like working for an essay mill company, not writing essays, but like editing them. And I remember editing one that was about this Russian director, and he talked about, how he thought he wrote post-apocalyptic films. He made this film called Elena, and his films are about small people living small lives. But he was talking about how you can make one person's life seem really important. It's the emotional connection. And so all those different things, I guess, and the second book I wrote was all emotional connection, and it didn't have a coherent plot or world building. And this one I tried to put all those things together to have the emotional arc and world building that worked and a plot that worked. I think plot probably didn't, and that's really what Lindsay came in on with lots of tough questions about the timeline and the motivations and the logic of things.
Great. All right. Sorry, I'm jumping around on my question sheet here.
No, you're fine.
So like sort of in keeping with characters, and I do want to go back to book eating itself, but just while we're here, so my favorite stories, I think the best stories are partly because they're more, the characters are morally complex, if not murky. So I want to, particularly like with Devon's first chapter, which we talked about, like, the idea that she has to find someone for her son to consume. I mean, that's, they're murdering people essentially, or maybe not necessarily murdering people, but certainly ruining lives, right? I don't know. So was that something that was like ringing in your head when you were writing about Devon, that even though she's the, the quote unquote protagonist hero of the story, like, how do we make her not sort of like a treacly, saccharine sweet sort of, hero kind of thing? So I guess I'm trying to get you to talk more about Devon and some of the tough choices that she really has to make.
Yeah, so I think that initially came from Kai, her choices, where I felt like the thing that we find interesting in vampires and a lot of monsters is they have to do unethical things to survive. They have to do horrible things just to stay alive. And that's the situation that her son is in, and she's trying to help with that, which is why she has to find him people to eat, but she can't give him like bad people and let him be a kind of Dexter who cleans up villains, because then he'll become bad. So her dilemma is she has to find good people for him to consume so that he stays alive. And that kind of, I guess it ties in later with the fact that they're all affected by the things they eat, whether it's books or minds. But I don't know, I wasn't interested in someone good. I think of Devon as a bad person. I think that she's not a hero. I think she has very few redeeming qualities, but I don't really need readers to like her just to understand why she is the way she is, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. That's partly why I don't know, I think it's such a cool first novel, or it's just a cool novel general, but like I think a first novelist mistake would be to try to make her like a shining star on the hill kind of character. So actually, in keeping with that sort of the moral, not moral ambiguity, but the moral murkiness, the tough choices that so many of these characters are presented with, even like book eating itself. I mean, we started off by talking about, reader, you had mentioned readers talk about consuming a book, etc., and describing it in food terms. I like that within the book eaters community, that so many of those characters who eat books are pretty terrible beings. I think, so many of us that work in writing, in particular, but arts in general, almost, like to imagine that like, people who read are better people than people who don't read. I mean, that's clearly not true. I mean, obviously there are plenty of readers who, plenty of readers who aren't like good people. So just the idea of the book itself doesn't make you necessarily a good person. Anyway, was that something that you had considered when you were writing about the book eaters?
Yeah, I think it came out during the writing, but I mean, I grew up reading a lot, but my background's very conservative and very religious. So it's a lot very religious, conservative writing, or everything's seen through that lens. My dad had books on philosophy, but it would be like, okay, this is Nietzsche and he's like an evil atheist. You have to understand that when you read his philosophy. And there's a slant to everything. And I think the book eaters, they control what their children read and have access to so tightly. That reading has become a kind of weapon for them, even among their own kind. And I don't think I've showed it very well, but I think part of the reason that Devon is a little bit different is she has some exposure to different books, and it does have an impact. Just a little bit, just that tiny act of like, oh, there's other ways of thinking.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's also really cool and sort of against expectations that she opens up a little bit, or shows a little bit more humanity actually through playing video games, without spoiling necessarily like when that happens in the book. So I don't know. Again, that was like a fun, unexpected, and a really cool, I thought, a really cool detail about a reminder. It's like, hey, these book eaters are existing within our now.
It's hard not to include video games.
Right.
I like them. They were a big part of my childhood. So.
Do you still play?
Yeah, some of them not nearly as much. It's hard to find the time. I have a real problem with slow reflexes, like so slow it causes me issues driving. So I can't play FPS games. And I've stopped playing MMOs because I can't cope with guild drama. It's like Twitter, but on crack. So I play RPGs in the come out. They don't make a lot of isometric RPGs anymore. or a lot of platformers anymore.
Mm.
Games are sort of unrecognizably different nowadays. But yeah, I did play some. Well, I played loads when I was younger. I'm probably up to my mid-20s.
Yeah. Similar. I also just know I get addicted to video games. So if I was going to read and write, I would have to stop. In fact, the last time I sort of was mildly addicted was playing Mario Kart with my son, which was a lot of fun. It happened to coincide with, I don't want to scare you, but my first two books tanking and not doing well. So I was really sort of depressed and unhappy with publishing. So I played Mario Kart for like 6 months, and it was like, whoa, 6 months just went by and I haven't written anything. So yeah, I try to stay away from them.
Yeah, I don't have a good kind of break, I guess. I remember the Dragon Age games came out, the first one, and I was spending 14 hours a day just trying to get through that
Whoa.
game.
Yeah.
So I know it's really bad.
It's hard, I know.
I don't have that time anymore. I've got kids and stuff now.
Right.
So
All right, let me ask you about a couple more. Have you talked about a few more of the main characters? Devon's brother Ramsay, for one. So again, another, if we were going to be so reductive to be like, oh, this is not a good, not a good being, and not a good person. But again, like through his, what had happened to him, and sort of like a seemingly innocent child sort of exploration, something sort of pretty monstrous happens to him. So I don't know if you want to talk about Devon's brother at all.
yeah, Devon's brother involved a lot in actually the draft that my editor first saw. He didn't have point of view chapters. He's got a few in the published version. I think just 2 actually, which is a bit weird that he only has 2, but he's kind of the epitome of, I guess, what happens if he's in a way the ultimate book eater. He encapsulates everything that their society kind of wants, and that makes him not very nice, I think. I don't think of him as a villain. I think he's different from Devon. He kind of took a different route, had different options, but readers can think what they like of him. I don't mind.
Sure. No, and again, like with what is presented to him as options, I mean, even if we don't sympathize with him, we can certainly empathize with, the tough decisions that he has to make. Maybe one more character, if you want to talk about a little bit. Hester, I really enjoy her introduction to the story. And I've yeah, I don't want to spoil it. I was going to say something about when she first meets Devon, what I was thinking about. It was a funny, I felt like I had like a book devil and a book angel on my shoulders arguing about what I wanted, but then I stopped. I was like, okay, I'm just going to see what happens. So anyway, Hester is another sort of main player of the novel.
Yeah, and you meet, so Hester's first chapter, you meet her and you don't know what she wants, whether she'll be an enemy or friend to Devon, and she's maybe a little bit of both. I think she's fun, and she kind of relies on one of my favorite anime tropes, which is, the bouncy character contrasted with the more serious one. But she has her own things going on and her own issues. And just as a fun fact, across the 3 editing drafts that we did with Lindsay, she changed from being human to book eater to mind eater back the other way, and ended up as one of those. I won't say which, but she did actually change what she was in different drafts and different edits, because I can be a bit ruthless with my editing changes. So
yeah. So do you know how many drafts you went through? Because it sounds like you're someone who will, unlike me, because I'm someone who tinkers as I go, and it's really annoying. I wish I could just spill out a draft and then go back and rewrite it.
I do tinker as I go, yeah. Otherwise, it's like errors kind of accrue in the story, and then there's too many and you can't progress, or at least that's how it is for me. But I also do, I found with my first 2 books, I was going into edits with this approach of what's the least amount I can do to get this chapter working, and that got me stuck. And I've changed now so that what does the story need that's most cool or fun, and sometimes that means just chucking a lot of stuff away. So I don't know what I did with the first one. It just kind of evolved. It was all over the place. And then with the editor, we were getting edit letters. So we did 3 developmental edits across 10 months. It was a lot. But it was worth the time, but it was a lot of time.
Okay, let's see. So just a reminder to everybody out there, I'm gonna probably ask another 10 minutes of questions, including a fun for me, lightning round. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A button down the bottom of your screen. So, well, a few more, then we'll go with the lightning round. So back to the idea of this is your first published novel, but I think just about for everybody who writes their first published novel is probably not their first written novel. But
Yes.
like, there's an old saw within publishing that, oh, the person's first novel tends to be really autobiographical. And then they're like, oh, what next? But so I don't know, like, I think it's sort of a fun question to ask because it's such a wild and interesting and varied novel, both just in tone and characters, et cetera. So anyway, like, do you look back at this book and think, geez, there's a lot of beyond, like, I guess normally what writers put into their own work. I mean, we're all putting personal experience into a book, but like, would you bristle at the idea that, oh, this is an autobiographical novel, or?
I feel like it was a prescient, I don't know how to pronounce that word, I've only seen it written down, prescient novel.
Yeah.
Because like obviously it's about a character who's a single mother, but when I started writing this book, I was married and kind of settled in my life, and then by the end of it, I've become a single mother and just kind of hit my own rock bottom. So that was a really surreal experience of writing about Devon and being like, do I even have the experience to talk about this? And then it's like, okay, yeah, I do now. So I don't know. I think I've talked about it a bit before in some of the letters that went out to booksellers, but actually I did reach a point where I was stuck in the book and I was stuck in my life, and working through the novel gave me the clarity to figure out that I needed to make changes. And having made changes in my life, that gave me the clarity to finish Devon's story. So it's not not autobiographical because I haven't killed like 50 people or burned down big manors, but
Well, I was hoping you weren't going to admit to that, but yeah.
there's something there in like, it was almost like a thought process to go through, I guess. It was a manifestation of a thought process in the life stage.
Oh, great answer. And then, of course, you found out that children do, in fact, eat our brains. So there was a little bit. Let me go back to one more. Probably this is the last one that I think makes you think hard. Like, why is he asking me this question? So I've seen not only in the jacket cover, but elsewhere, the book referred to sort of as an anti-fairy tale. I don't know if you're on board with that, and if you are, like, and if you want to elaborate a little bit what that might mean to you in terms of the story.
I understand why they say that, but I think that's maybe not giving fairy tales credit. They're fairly grim stories.
Yeah.
And I know that most people are aware that like the Brothers Grimm versions are darker, but there are some really, really bleak fairy tales out there that never even made the Brothers Grimm cut or the Disney cut. So yeah, I think I understand why people say that, but to me it's kind of funny as well. I think it's very much a fairy tale story if you examine fairy tales closely enough.
Right. So maybe it's an anti-Disney fairy tale story. Maybe we would be more accurate. I don't know. Or the Disneyfication of some fairy tales. I don't know.
A fairy tale with its makeup taken off or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I have two more and then the lightning round, but they'll probably be pretty quick. So on your website, I noticed there was a few different blogs, one that referenced travel, and you've lived on 3 different continents from what I could tell, and I've only lived on one. So do you feel like how has sort of travel or living in these different areas of the world inform your writing in general, or did it inform this book in particular in any way, or is it hard to say just because that's what you do?
No, I've lived here, if anywhere, the longest. Living here definitely influenced the writing here. A lot of the locations are places I've been to. Some of them are tweaked for dramatic effect, which occasionally gets complaints. I'm really sorry to anyone who lives in Alnwick. I didn't mean what I said about your town. I don't know. Yeah, I think it does shape you. I think mostly you don't fit in anywhere, but you do get the experience of different places. In the past heat wave, it's very useful to have experience living in Texas and Hong Kong, so I could tell my daughter what we're going to do for the 40-degree heat here. I don't know. I've not been back to either of those places actually. Texas is kind of terrifying at the moment, and Hong Kong is kind of terrifying at the moment. So neither are places I would live anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like when you say the idea of not fitting in, I definitely felt that was a core part of Devon, of her
Yeah.
character and experience for quite a bit of the novel. Okay. I was going to ask, were there specific books or even movies, if you want to talk about that, you felt like were sort of touchstones for the book eaters, or things that you felt like were, inspirations, either direct or indirect?
I guess lots of them. I always think of Fight Club as a kind of good inspiration for what I like in an unlikable character. I did grow up reading I think I've read everything Lovecraft has ever published. I know he's like a horrible human being, but I didn't know that when I read it. So that sense of horror is there. The Bronte sisters, definitely, I've loved and read as a child. Their influence on this book. Oh yeah, I guess video games all over the place, various kinds. Everything's, of course, the fairy tales. That's the big, obvious, massive one.
Sure.
In particular, some of the weirder ones by George MacDonald, who's not super well known, but I think his stories are amazing, very philosophical. I do recommend them.
Well, in addition to video games, I mean, you mentioned, and actually Kimberly read this in your bio, the idea of you rolling D20s.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know, like, were there any RPGs, or like, could you see yourself writing in, like, would that be fun to have an RPG of the book eaters world? Is that something like, if you ever like run a game, like, I don't know if you wrote for RPGs at all, or if it's something you just were like a player. Yeah.
I did try and write one briefly. I'm not very good at devising rule systems, and that's where I fall down. I tried to do one for an underwater setting years and years ago. It didn't go anywhere. Trying to figure out underwater combat just made me give up. So yeah, someone else can do them though.
Yeah, it's fine. Growing up, just because I was the oldest, I didn't have a lot of friends, and they weren't playing RPGs. But just over the pandemic, my horror writer friends who are RPG players, had me play, and it was a lot of fun, even though I had no idea what the hell I was doing. We were playing Mork Borg. I don't know, it's more of a horror RPG. Anyway, all right, why don't we go to the lightning round? So the idea behind the lightning round is that these are, quick answers.
Okay.
There's no pressure. I mean, there's no pressure. There's no right or wrong. We're just going to go with like a quick set of questions. Okay, so the first one: what book would you eat first for a meal? Like, if this was your first meal as a book eater, what book are you going to eat?
It'd be The History of Western Philosophy. I know that's very pretentious, but I do love that book, but it's huge.
It sounds like a heavy meal. All right, how about for a dessert after that?
Probably poetry. I'd have to think longer about which one, but probably poetry.
Yeah. All right, so if some of these questions are coming from your bio too. What yoga pose makes you fall over the most?
Headstand. No, handstand.
Handstand? Like, use it without a wall to help you? I know that's sort of like a.
If I don't use a wall, I definitely fall over.
Okay. Gwen the sausage dog. I don't know. I just wanted to say Gwen the sausage dog because I think that's very funny. So is Gwen a dachshund? I mean, that's sort of an obvious question.
Yeah, she is.
Hello. Oh, hi, Gwen. I have not a dachshund, but my dog Holly is probably the same weight, 15 pounds, mini pincher.
Yeah. She's a bit grumpy because she's tired this time of night and I've woken her up.
Oh, how old is she?
She's 2 years old.
Oh, okay. So relatively still puppy-ish.
Yeah. Her head keeps disappearing because I've got a background on. Hello.
Thanks for making an appearance, Gwen. All right.
I'll let her go back to sleep.
That's okay. A few more left. Tea or coffee?
Yes.
Both. You gotta choose one. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
I asked that partly because you live in England now, but also I ask it because I actually don't like coffee, which makes me a monster. I only drink tea. I still like the taste of coffee. Sorry. That's okay. Would you? Well, I assume eventually you'll let your kids read your book, but how long will your oldest have to wait before they can read The Book Eaters?
I mean, I haven't let my parents read my book, so I don't
What?
know.
Oh, come on.
No, they're very upset that there's no like it's not Christian and stuff.
Oh,
I don't
right,
know
right.
about my kids. I think I want to say when they're older, but I also know I was reading really terrible adult novels at about 13, so
Yeah.
it's really hard to say.
Are they
My daughter has
readers?
read no, my son's developmentally delayed, so um he's 7, but he's kind of about 3 as
Yeah.
well, like in terms of what he's doing at school. My daughter's favorite book is Coraline, which everyone told me you shouldn't let her read when she's 9, but she loved it. She
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
loved it. She likes all the creepy, crawly horror things that are scary, so
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay, last lightning round question, then we'll go to the Q&A. So what's a wild swim? I don't know what a wild swim is. I could have Googled it, but again, this is from Sunny's bio. She mentioned she'll go for a wild
No,
swim.
wild swimming is what we would have called swimming, I think, when we were kids. It's just when you go and you swim in a lake or a river, but now this is like wild swimming because it's not in a pool.
Oh,
If you just say swimming, I think people here assume you mean indoors because it's very cold. It does get very cold.
oh, okay. I thought it was like you were just any sort of like this brackish pond you just saw on the side of the road. You're like,
No.
"Nope, I'm going swimming in that."
No,
like
I do
you-
like very, very cold swims though. I've swum at the kind of very top bit of Scotland and stuff, and that gets really chilly.
It can sound chilly. All right, so with that great question that I asked, let's go to the Q&A. So a reminder, please don't put questions in the chat, put them into the Q&A. So first one we have is, would you ever revisit the Book Eater's world or write a companion novel?
Yeah, I hope to someday. But the one I have in mind would be standalone in that world. It would wrap up some of the plot points. But it would be from a different character's point of view. Contractually, though, if that's okay to say, I can't look at those until I finish the contract I'm on, which is for 2 more standalones. And then Tor says we can talk about it if I'm still interested. So yeah, in future someday it'd be nice.
Oh,
The
so,
other half of Devon's plot is missing, so
yeah. Oh, so wow. So you the next 2 they don't want with Book Eaters.
no, I think they were afraid it would turn into this kind of Dresden Files type adventures of
Yeah.
Devon and co. And they didn't want that to happen. And there are lots of reasons for that, and it's complicated, but I kind of
Interesting.
agree with them on it.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, I very much respect that. Like I know there are millions of series readers. I'm not one of them. And like my first experience with publishing went pretty sour because they tried to squeeze a crime series out of me. Partly
Yeah.
why it went sour. And I wanted no part of it. And obviously it didn't work out very well. That the first time with publishing anyway.
Yeah, I've seen that happen to friends where, you
Yeah.
know, they buy you for a trilogy and they lose interest halfway through book 2, and it's just absolutely crushing for the author.
How about like, would you do short stories in that world potentially?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'm really slow with short stories. It would take me ages. I might do.
Yeah, do the novels first.
Yeah.
Obviously. Okay, let's see. Through that one. When is the present timeline in the Book Eater set? I had to ask my younger brother about when the games and consoles were released. LOL. I guess you're referring to video games in the book.
Yeah. So the video games and consoles are actually out of whack by about 2 years. The one of the games that Devon's playing on the PS1 weren't actually released for another year or 2. But for reasons it just had to be at that. I just hand waved it. No one sent me an angry email about it yet. So the book is the present day timeline is about 2002. So a lot of the book is kind of in the 90s, which I guess makes it historical fiction, which is also heartbreaking. But it's because it's an era before mobile phones, which I think would just destroy their society, to be honest. It just, I mean, that could be a book in itself. What happens to book eaters when mobile phones are there?
Right, and ebooks too.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. This is sort of a cryptic question, but I like it. No matter your age, what age do you consider yourself?
Sorry, what was that again?
The question is, no matter your age, so I guess no matter what your
Okay.
actual age is, what age do you consider yourself?
Probably 30. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. it depends when I get up. I feel older, or depending on how sore I am.
I think I felt very old when my kids were very young and I was just, yeah, very tired all the time. I felt absolutely ancient, but now I feel 30. Maybe that's just like denial as I get further from 30. um,
To be in the 30s. I won't mention how old I am. But I still dress like a teenager, which is a problem. Not really, but anyway, I'm not going to answer that question. We still have a few more minutes, so if you have a few more questions, please put them into Q&A. But while I wait, I do want to ask you. It's always so obnoxious, but it happens to me too. You're out celebrating your new book that you just wrote. In this case, your first book, and the question is, what's next? What are you working on now? Since you sort of brought it up with your deal with Tor, is there anything you could say about the book that you started or the book that you're thinking about starting?
Yeah, I have started it, and it took me about a year to get an outline. I was really struggling, I think, just second book syndrome. But it's kind of a historical fantasy set in like 1960s post-war Hong Kong, in the walled city, and it is kind of like ghosts and a little bit of exorcist, and not horror sense because ghosts aren't necessarily horrific. And I don't know, I find them a bit weird because you don't feel very Chinese when you're mixed. And definitely I know that Chinese people look at me and just see a Western person, but it is also stuff that you kind of grow up with. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, that's the next one. It's very different in tone, a lot lighter. I really missed writing a book with humor. I think there's very little in the Book Eaters. It's very serious all the time.
Well, that's exciting. Cool. All right, let's see. What was your favorite book as a teenager or young adult?
My favorite book is it's still the same. It's a very obscure YA fantasy, which basically no one has ever heard of, I can tell. And it's called The Wings of a Falcon by Cynthia Voigt. She's not known for being a YA author. And this was before YA fantasy became a thing, so it's very distant, third person. It has no plot. It's just sort of meandering, and I just love everything about it. I think it's really interesting. It's a kind of Bildungsroman, I guess.
What was the title again? Sorry.
It's called The Wings of a Falcon, and it's a no magic YA fantasy that was put out by Scholastic, and it's just kind of somewhere between literary and, I don't know. This is going to sound really mean. I think it's the kind of book that, like, similar to Name of the Wind, but about a tenth of the word count. So.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really cool. This is just occurring to me without getting either of us in trouble, and I say that sort of cheekily. Yeah. Do you consider what you're writing sort of like a mashup of literary and fantasy, or?
Not to me, because I read books that I think are pretty literary. I know there's some talk early on from the marketing people going, "Oh, we could pitch it to the literary crowd." And in my head, I was thinking, "No, you can't. I know what they're like." I would say I'm very commercial, by choice and by inclination. To me, literary is stuff like kind of like literary sci-fi would be like Gene Wolfe or something like that, or the very high end. Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a sort of marketing category. But I'm not going to tell you how to describe your book. For me, I felt like this was sort of like a literary in the sense that I always felt the characters were coming first.
Okay.
There's plenty of plot. I mean, don't get me wrong, and there's plenty of fun twists and turns. And even though, as you said, no one would describe it as a comedy, it was, for as dark as it gets, really fun. But also, I mean, so it's without spoiling things. One of the things I really enjoyed about it, I thought totally this was like, wow, this is really unique, interesting book. There are so many different tones to what's going on here. Okay, let's see. Sorry, a few more left. Where to go? Let's add. If you had to recommend a book to read after yours, what would you suggest?
Oh, looking for similar kinds of things, probably Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, which is, if you haven't heard of it, it's about a woman scientist who discovers her husband is cheating on her with a clone that he made from research that he stole from her, and which he's programmed to be more docile than her. and it's got a lot of killing you vibes. It is quite funny and it's very brutal. I think other books, if you want a kind of speculative thriller, Claire North's books are really good. First 15 Lives of Harry August, which I really enjoyed. Another one, I guess, that's very far out there. What's it called? I always get this title wrong because there's more than one book with Evelyn in it. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn, Hardcastle. Yeah, Hardcastle. And that's about a kind of Agatha Christie mystery where this guy is like Groundhog Day. At the end of the day, this woman dies and he wakes up in a different body of one of the people in this castle or something. And it's so out of this world. It's really good. I think I'm trying to think of books that are kind of similar in the sense of being a bit oddball, but maybe that little bit contemporary feel and not quite fantasy, not quite sci-fi.
So I'll mention two of the books I read after your book that I thought actually were really fun to read. Matt Johnson, Invisible Things, which it sort of takes place on a discovered colony on Europa. And it's very much a satire, a political satire in a lot of ways too, but I think tonally, I don't know, I enjoyed, it felt a smooth transition of reading your book and then going into Matt's. And also, I hope I'm not butchering the title, Our Wives Under the Sea by COVID Brain.
I did a panel with her and she was really nice and her book sounded so interesting and creepy.
Julia Armfield. It's terrible. But that book, I mean, contemporary, I think tonally it matches up very well with your book. It's very serious. It's also very beautiful and grim and odd and wonderful. All right. Anyway, let's see. I think we get time for maybe one more left. One or two. Let's see. Well, we talked about this before, but you could elaborate for everybody else. Will you have any in-person events for the book eaters? And if not, like maybe you could mention upcoming online ones if you have any more.
Well, I'm doing the 2 online ones tomorrow. I think I am doing I know of one event in York in October, I think October the 5th or something like that, with Fox Lane Books at York Library. And then the day after, I'm going down to London in Trafalgar. I don't even know if I've said that right. British names are such a minefield. Trafalgar.
No, you said it right. Yeah.
Waterstones. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I've been here 17 years, and every so often I still discover there's something I've been saying wrong this whole time. Anyway, yeah. So those are the only 2 that I'm doing that I know of. I don't know I don't think it's that common as debut authors. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, for sure. And obviously with COVID and continued COVID, it throws live events for a loop. All right, let's.
Yeah.
I think we have one last question. It's a good one to end with, I think. If you were going to write in a genre other than speculative fiction, what would it be?
It would probably be crime. I love the crap out of crime novels and crime fiction. Yeah.
Any particular favorite authors, current ones?
Current ones is hard. I've not read them in a long time. I think P.D. James is a favorite for a long time. I thought she had this nice blend of like very thoughtful kind of fiction and I love the structure of crime novels. I love structure in novels, and I think they just have this perfect kind of structure that's really soothing to read, and lots of character development. It's all about the detective. It's all about their quirks and the different players. Yeah, I don't know. I think everyone should read a little bit of crime if they can.
Oh, for sure. I guess I'm going to ask one more follow-up.
Okay.
So when you read crime, are you someone who actively tries to figure out the solution to the mystery, or are you just sort of like along for the ride and enjoying, or somewhere in between maybe?
I think some crime detectives you can't. So I think there's some like I guess Sherlock Holmes is a classic example. Everyone knows that the way the mystery is structured, you can't figure it out. Really, you're not designed to, because he's withholding loads of information. And it's all about showing off how clever he is and unpicking the puzzle. But I think some of them, I guess, more like Poirot or Frost or whatever, you can work out what's going to happen, and it's more about the character drama, I think, for some of those.
Yeah.
Than the actual mystery.
That's my appeal. So I'm not smart enough to figure out the crime in a novel usually. All right. With that admission, why don't we maybe bring Kimberly back in and say thank you to everybody?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for joining. Those of you who have joined us in the virtual space, because it's really a treat to be listening to the two of y'all talk. It's like being a fly on the wall in a personal conversation, and you know, writers talk differently than everyone else. Y'all are both masters of craft, and it's a privilege for us to be able to hear you on that.
Well, thank you.
I will send a follow-up email to those of you who have signed up with the Country Bookshop. I'm sure Oolong will do the same, with links to buy the books. And yes, Casey Davis, is there a link to purchase computers? Yes, I will put it in the chat now as I'm talking, but I will also email, and I'm sure Oolong will as well. And sorry, I'm going to do that for you real quickly, because as I'm about to say, supporting local bookstores is everything. And if you love a bookstore, you know, buy your books from us, because that's literally how we all exist. That's the way it goes. So it's a simple
Absolutely.
concept, but one that cannot be said enough, because it's really easy to do something easier than call or walk into a store or message everybody. So I want to thank you for attending. Thank you for writing, guys. It makes the world go round. So thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Book
Congratulations
Thank you so
on you.
much. Yeah, thank you. You're a great host. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, everybody.